What if the song that made you famous was the one you secretly wished you had never written? For Tears for Fears, Everybody Wants to Rule the World became that paradox, the anthem that defined an era, yet nearly tore them apart. It was a song born from hesitation, rewritten under pressure, and recorded in a style they barely understood. Decades later, both Roland Orzabal and Curt have admitted it never truly felt like their song. And while the world still dances to it, they remember the frustration, the exhaustion, and the strange feeling of watching something they once doubted turn into a monster hit. This is the story of how a perfect pop song became the band's most complicated regret. When Everybody Wants to Rule the World first came into existence, Tears for Fears were not exactly thrilled about it. In fact, Roland Orzabal almost left it off. Songs from the big chair entirely. The band was already deep into recording what would become their defining album when producer Chris Hughes suggested one more song, a track built around a driving shuffle rhythm. But for a group that prided itself on intricate emotional pop, that rhythm felt strange, almost alien. Roland later admitted, "It was something I had never played before. It did not feel natural." The early working title was Everybody Wants to Go to War, a darker, heavier take that Orzabal simply could not connect with. He said that when you are a songwriter who does not like the lyric, the song dies. Still, Hughes pushed them to finish it, convinced there was something special buried under the discomfort. The band spent long nights reworking the structure, smoothing out awkward phrasing, and searching for the right tone between cynicism and melody. Eventually, the shift from go to war to rule the world changed everything. It turned a song about conflict into a song about ambition. That subtle tweak unlocked the entire track, but it did not erase their hesitation. To Orzabal, it still felt too easy, too polished compared to the introspective darkness of songs like Shout or Mad World. Curt, on the other hand, saw its potential. His calm, almost detached delivery fit the song's understated tension perfectly. But behind the scenes, the atmosphere was tense. The band was exhausted, and the record label was pressuring them to deliver something more radio-friendly. What started as a last-minute addition slowly became the centerpiece, and to some degree, their loss of control over it planted the first seeds of resentment. They could feel that this song was about to become bigger than them, and that thought made them uneasy. But their creative unease would soon turn into something more tangible, because the compromises they made in the studio were only the beginning of a much bigger fight over what the song truly meant. When the song finally came together, it sounded effortless, but behind that clean, anthemic sound was a tangle of creative disagreements. The lyrics, on the surface, seemed optimistic, but their meaning was anything but simple. Lines like, "Welcome to your life, there's no turning back," carried a quiet darkness that contrasted with the glossy production. Roland Orzabal often said that Tears for Fears music was about psychology and inner turmoil, the messy side of human emotion. Yet Everybody Wants to Rule the World was different. It felt detached, almost ironic. Even the title carried an odd history. Joe Strummer from The Clash once claimed that Orzabal had borrowed the phrase from a line in Charlie Don't Surf. And according to some stories, Orzabal jokingly handed over £5 in royalties. Whether that story is fact or myth, it captured what the band already felt, that the song never fully belonged to them. It was catchy, universal, and instantly appealing, which, for an artist driven by deeper meaning, could almost feel like a curse. Then there was that haunting lyric, so sad they had to fade it. Fans often thought it referred to a lost relationship or some grand metaphor, but insiders hinted it might have been a sly comment about how the record label demanded a shorter radio cut. To Roland, fading a song early for commercial reasons was artistic compromise, plain and simple. For a perfectionist songwriter, that kind of interference hit hard. Still, the song's contradictions were what made it powerful. The upbeat melody carrying a cynical message about greed and control. Roland once described it as a Cold War anthem wrapped in a smile. The song questioned human nature itself, our endless need to lead, dominate, and win. But the irony was that its success would soon dominate the band in the same way. And once cameras started rolling for the music video, things took an even stranger turn. What was meant to showcase their biggest hit turned into one of the most chaotic experiences of their career, one that made them question whether this song was worth the trouble at all. The music video for Everybody Wants to Rule the World was supposed to be a triumphant milestone for Tears for Fears, a glossy, cinematic showcase for their biggest hit. With director Nigel Dick at the helm, the production moved to California to capture a distinctly American energy. Endless highways, desert horizons, Curt Smith at the wheel of a vintage convertible, all while the band's now iconic anthem echoed the spirit of freedom and adventure. But the reality was far from celebratory. Filming quickly spiraled into disarray, beset by relentless technical glitches and impossible deadlines. The cast and crew struggled against time, heat, and breakdowns. It all came to a head when a botched dirt bike stunt left a young rider injured, an incident so serious it cast a pall over the entire project. The mood darkened, tempers flared. Director Nigel Dick reportedly broke down under the pressure, tears and exhaustion marking what Curt Smith would later call a disaster. What everyone hoped would be a routine shoot instead became a trauma none wished to relive. Ironically, when MTV began showcasing the video on heavy rotation, its sun-soaked images and nonchalant road trip aesthetics defined the band's public image. It exploded in popularity, embedding itself in pop culture and cementing a signature look for Tears for Fears. Suave, mysterious, freewheeling across the highways of America. For millions, this was the definitive version of the band and their music. Privately, though, the band felt boxed in by that glossy image. The video, produced under stress and reluctantly embraced, quickly outgrew the reality of the group's intentions. Everybody Wants to Rule the World became their calling card, the accessible, endlessly replayable hit demanded by fans. Yet, it misrepresented what Curt and Roland Orzabal hoped to express. Instead of their usual explorations of trauma, psychology, and deeper emotions, they were now seen as radio-friendly pop stars. The public wanted the band they'd seen in the video, not the introspective, experimental artists behind the scenes. This disconnect began to chafe. Interviews years later revealed the deeper cost. As the single's success soared, so did the weight of public expectation. The band, especially Roland and Curt, felt increasingly unable to break from the shallow pop stereotype now attached to them. As creative frustrations simmered, they faced a personal and professional tension that would eventually threaten the very heart of their collaboration. The pressure to keep repeating that success wasn't just external. It started to wedge itself between the very people who made the music. Success changes everything, and for Tears for Fears, it changed them. When Everybody Wants to Rule the World hit #1 around the world, it should have been the band's crowning moment. The kind of success most artists only dream of. But instead of celebration, it exposed a divide that had been quietly growing between Roland Orzabal and Curt Smith. What started as a creative partnership built on trust and mutual respect was now bending under the weight of fame, ego, and expectation. Roland had always been the driving force behind the band, the thinker, the lyricist, the one obsessed with depth and meaning. He poured his understanding of psychology and human emotion into every song, crafting lyrics that dissected fear, control, and trauma. Curt, on the other hand, had the charisma. He was the voice and face that the world connected with, calm, charming, and effortlessly cool. On Everybody Wants to Rule the World, it was Curt's voice that carried the song's bittersweet message, while Roland, the man who wrote it, watched from the sidelines. The irony was brutal. The biggest hit of Roland's career was the one he didn't sing. That imbalance quietly ate at both of them. Fans loved Curt's effortless delivery, his image as the laid-back frontman with the easy smile, while Roland, intense and cerebral, was often painted as the serious one. The band's image was no longer being shaped by their ideas, but by their personalities. Tears for Fears, a band built on equal parts intellect and emotion, was now being divided into the voice, and the mind. In interviews, Roland began to speak with a hint of distance about "Everybody Wants to Rule the World." He admired its craftsmanship, but didn't feel emotionally tied to it. He once described it as a song that writes itself, and for someone like him, who thrived on struggle, conflict, and meaning, that was not praise. It was detachment. The tension followed them on tour. Night after night, audiences erupted the moment those iconic opening chords rang out. Crowds sang along, word for word, their voices drowning out the band's own. It should have been exhilarating. Instead, it felt like confinement. Fans wanted that one song, that one sound, again and again. But Tears for Fears had never wanted to be just another pop band. They had built their career on introspection, not repetition. Roland longed to explore darker, more experimental ideas, while Curt was worn down by the grind of fame, the endless interviews, the media scrutiny, the expectation to smile and perform. Curt later admitted that this period was exhausting. The constant pressure to match the success of Everybody Wants to Rule the World felt suffocating. And Roland, already a perfectionist, started retreating further into the studio, searching for something deeper, something real. The two began to drift apart, not because they stopped caring, but because the music industry had turned their creative chemistry into a commodity. Every time they tried to move forward, they were pulled back by the shadow of their own creation. By the late 1980s, that shadow had become impossible to ignore. The friendship that had fueled their early work was now strained, their communication reduced to short, tense exchanges. Roland began pouring his frustration into writing "Sowing the Seeds of Love," a song intentionally more complex, both musically and thematically, than Everybody Wants to Rule the World. It was his rebellion, his statement that Tears for Fears could still push boundaries. The lush arrangements, political undertones, and layered production were the exact opposite of the simplicity that made Everybody Wants to Rule the World a hit. It was Roland's way of reclaiming control, reminding the world that their artistry went deeper than radio singles. But that need for control came at a price. Behind every great song are the things no one sees, the creative clashes, the late nights, the small disagreements that start to add up. The band that once moved in perfect sync was now moving in different directions. Roland was driven by a need to create something profound. Curt was searching for balance, for peace. The more success they achieved, the more fragile that balance became. And so, beneath the shimmering perfection of Everybody Wants to Rule the World, lay a story of friction. Two brilliant minds wrestling with the cost of success. What had begun as a moment of triumph ended as a quiet fracture. The song that had brought them the world had also, in some way, taken it from them. And as the years went on, both men would realize that ruling the world, even musically, always comes with a price. The deeper Tears for Fears sank into the glow of global success, the more Roland Orzabal began to feel like he had lost something vital: control. Everybody Wants to Rule the World was a masterpiece of production, crafted to near perfection. But in that precision, Roland felt the soul slipping away. He would later reflect that the song's clean, almost mechanical feel symbolized a kind of creative surrender. It was the first time the band had embraced a shuffle rhythm, the first time they leaned heavily on sequencers and layered synthesizers instead of their usual emotional rawness. The track sounded flawless, and that was the problem. Producer Chris Hughes and engineer Dave Bascom were perfectionists in their own right, fine-tuning every beat and texture until the song shimmered like glass. It was undeniably beautiful. But it also became a symbol of everything Roland feared about pop music, that the more polished it became, the less truth it carried. He once described the production process as losing the human element in exchange for precision. The irony wasn't lost on him. A song about control was, in itself, a product of control. Even years later, Roland admitted that whenever he tried writing new material, echoes of Everybody Wants to Rule the World would creep back in, as if the song's DNA had fused with his own creative instincts. No matter what direction they took, they could not escape it. He once joked that every time he thought he had written something new, it somehow ended up sounding like that song. For an artist constantly chasing evolution, being haunted by your own past work felt like a curse. Curt, on the other hand, viewed it with more balance. He recognized the song's perfection as a double-edged sword. It opened doors, but it also defined them forever. When they reunited years later, he spoke about their early resistance to nostalgia, saying they never wanted to become a greatest hits band. But fans had a different idea. No matter how deep or experimental their new music became, Everybody Wants to Rule the World was always the one that people waited for. The song that paid the bills, but also stole the spotlight. And that haunting mix of pride and resentment only deepened with time. Because as the song's influence grew, it stopped belonging to Tears for Fears entirely. It became something bigger, something the world could reinterpret, reshape, and recycle. And that's when the story of Everybody Wants to Rule the World entered its strangest chapter. When everyone else started ruling it, by the time the 90s arrived, Everybody Wants to Rule the World had taken on a life of its own. The song was everywhere, in commercials, films, political documentaries, and later, even video games. Cover versions emerged across generations, each reshaping its tone. Lord's haunting, stripped-down version for the Hunger Games. Catching Fire turned it from an 80s anthem into a dystopian whisper. Others transformed it into jazz, dance, even symphonic pieces. It was no longer just a Tears for Fears song. It was a cultural artifact, and that, strangely, became one of the band's lingering regrets. In interviews, both Roland Orzabal and Curt have said they were proud of its longevity, yet slightly uneasy about how often it was reinterpreted. "It keeps coming back," Roland once said, "and sometimes I do not know if that's a blessing or a warning." The irony was undeniable. A song about control had become uncontrollable. Every new generation found its own meaning in the lyrics, sometimes twisting the original intent beyond recognition. What was once a cynical observation about power and corruption had turned into a feel-good anthem about ambition and success. The very ideas the song was meant to question. Even when they performed it live decades later, the crowd's energy was different. Fans sang it joyfully, arms raised, smiling, as if the song were about unity. But behind those smiles, the band knew its message was darker, that not everyone can rule the world, and that wanting to often destroys you in the process. Roland has said that performing it now feels like a reflection of the times repeating themselves, a reminder that greed, control, and chaos never really disappear. They just evolve. By 2022, when they released The Tipping Point, both men were older, more introspective. They could finally look back at Everybody Wants to Rule the World without bitterness, but also without illusions. It had made them legends, yes, but it had also defined them so completely that everything after it lived in its shadow. They had created something too powerful, too timeless, to ever escape. And that is perhaps the strangest legacy of all. The song they once resisted, the one they nearly abandoned, became the one that outlived every argument, every reinvention, and every doubt. It ruled their world, long after they stopped wanting it to. In the end, Everybody Wants to Rule the World became more than a hit. It became a mirror. For Tears for Fears, it reflected everything they loved and hated about fame, perfection, and the cost of success. It began as a song they almost discarded, written in a rhythm they did not understand, with lyrics that felt too light for their usual depth. Yet that very simplicity carried a truth deeper than they realized, that everyone, in some way, craves control, whether over others, their lives, or their art. Roland Orzabal once said that songs have lives of their own, and sometimes they outgrow their creators. Everybody Wants to Rule the World is proof of that. It ruled charts, ruled the 80s, and, in a way, ruled the band itself. What began as reluctance became legacy, the kind of song that continues to echo long after its creators have stopped chasing it. And maybe that is why the band's relationship with it will always be complicated. It represents both the beauty and the burden of success, a song that captured the world but quietly took a piece of the artists who made it. So the next time you hear "Everybody Wants to Rule the World," listen beyond the bright melody. Behind that glossy sound is the story of two musicians wrestling with the very idea of control and learning the hard way that once the world falls in love with your creation, you never truly own it again. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more deep dives into the untold stories behind legendary songs. And tell me in the comments, do you think Tears for Fears really hated their biggest hit, or did the world just love it too much?